So we've got people joining, so welcome. We can't see you, Jonny and I can only see each other. We were busy sharing our experiences from travelling many years ago when we were younger men. So yeah, thanks very much for joining, everyone. We're just going to hold on for another couple of minutes till I get the go-ahead from Alice to start. So yes, if you just want to hang on for a minute, we'll get going shortly.
I apologise in advance if my children come through that door. It might happen. I have put a sign on telling them not to do it, but it doesn't mean they won't.
It's great. I think everybody now has got used to children appearing in business meetings. My son appears regularly on my lap. There's only one nearly a year old. I think one of the silver linings of all of this has been, I think, a certainly change in attitudes towards working from home and that more blended approach where you've got, if you think 6 months ago, people would be terrified of their child coming in, and now it's actually sort of people smile and embrace it.
Yeah, well, also, interestingly, I think in a lot of big companies, particularly, people kind of wear a mask to work, and they go and put their work face on, and they don't really let people into their personal lives and things like that. So I think there's probably forced a lot of change in that, where you can't really not be yourself, really, when your kids are coming in the room.
Right, so we're going to start. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining. It's very exciting to have you here. And thank you for taking off an hour of your day to come and listen to us talk about CRO versus experimentation and how to do it properly. We're very lucky to have Jonny Longden with us, who in the last 13 years, he's helped the likes of Sky, Visa, Manchester United, if you support them, Nike, O2, and various other amazing brands. He's helped them put analytics and experimentation at the heart of their businesses. And he's now conversion director for the marketing agency and performance marketing agency Journey Further. So we're very lucky to have Jonny here. He's going to talk a bit more about himself in a minute and then launch straight on into the presentation. The theme of today is why CRO is sort of experimentation 1.0 and why now experimentation is really the key word, and why the likes of Sky, where Jonny has direct experience, have really benefited significantly from implementing an experimentation-driven culture versus a CRO-driven function. It's going to be a really, really interesting topic, and we are looking forward to you adding in questions as we go. I'll try and bring them in to sort of pepper into the conversation. Jonny's very kindly said he doesn't mind being interrupted at relevant points. So do that, and we hope and believe that you will all take something actionable from this. Just so you know who I am, I'm Charlie Blake-Thomas. I'm the CEO of iQuant. We host these lunchtime learning sessions. We started them really when everybody started working from home as a reaction to trying to help and do our part, as it were. My background is product and commercial, so I've got lots of interest in this topic of experimentation. I've implemented it in my last couple of roles, and I've probably got lots of battle scars, and I'm very interested to hear what Jonny's going to talk about. We'll come on to that in a second. And very quickly, if you don't know iQuant, who are we, what do we do? In 30 seconds, iQuant helps our clients make faster design decisions with greater confidence. We specialize in creating data and insights as early as the prototyping stage. So if you're using Figma or Adobe XD or any of those other tools to generate medium to high fidelity prototypes and onwards, we can generate predictive analytics at that point to help you as designers to make better decisions, make more informed decisions. Unlike tools like Google Analytics and Decibel Insight, where you have to be live and they're tracking user behavior. We're predicting what will happen using neuroscience and artificial intelligence. So if that sounds of interest, then do get in touch, but that's not what today is about. So without further ado, Jonny, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Charlie. So really good intro there, really high level. Of what this is about is I fundamentally think that experimentation and CRO are two different things, and I'm going to explain why and how to do the experimentation part of it. The first point I just want to make is you can get kind of hung up on the words that you use for these things. There's probably people who do CRO who call it experimentation, vice versa. But hopefully what will come through this is underneath those words what I'm actually talking about. But just before I do that, a bit of an introduction to me, which Charlie's already done a little bit of. I've been in conversion optimization and experimentation for about 13 years, actually, since it was invented. I first ran a test on a website using Google Website Optimizer when it had just come out. And I've been with agencies and client side since then, and now doing that really, both as a management consultant, helping people like O2, Manchester United, Nike, help them set up internal operations, and then at Sky. And client side also Visa. So I started and built a large experimentation function at Sky, which is pretty innovative really. And then since started another consultancy, now really trying to focus on helping clients build those services in-house. Follow me on LinkedIn if you don't already. I share a lot of this content all the time, and Twitter not so much, but follow me there if you want as well. So I'm just going to start out with a bit of a history of CRO, which helps frame why I think CRO and experimentation are two different things, really. So if you go really far back to the beginning of the internet, or when the internet started to be used for commercial things, 96 into the 2010s, what you had really was a lot of companies with websites, and those websites would be controlled by their IT teams. And that is literally the same IT team you would go and get your computer fixed by. And they were using very slow waterfall processes, and there weren't really kind of CMS programs and things back then. And basically, you know, you might want to change something on your website and have very, very little control over doing it, or it's going to take a long time and a lot of requirements gathering and all this kind of boring stuff to do it. And then around about 2007, along came A/B testing tools. The first one, to my knowledge, was Google Website Optimizer, and overshadowing what that does. So overshadowing the fact that allows you to, you know, run a controlled experiment on a website. What happened was that all of a sudden you've got a JavaScript tag that allows somebody to change something on the website without going to IT, to dynamically modify the content. And that's really a very important part of the history of CRO, because suddenly you've got somebody, you know, somebody in marketing, even somebody with very little coding knowledge can go and make changes and do things. And then, so CRO kind of kicks off as a discipline. And that sort of really kind of has built quite slowly from 2010 until now. I think you'll see this stuff generally kind of really start to ramp up now. It's been quite a slow thing, but it's always been a kind of, or mostly it's been represented as a kind of hacking. So you've got somebody outside of IT who is sort of tweaking front end things and coming up with a few tricks to try and make the revenue better. And the really important thing is that whilst that's been going on, you've still got that IT team with a roadmap of stuff that they're developing waterfall. And so then what happens is from 2010 till now, in parallel, actually companies have realized that digital is the beating heart of what they do. They've really kind of brought it under control. They've developed agile teams, or they've, you know, started working with better external agencies and things like that. They're, you know, they're working much more nimbly, and so they've taken control of their digital stuff. But for the most part, CRO has retained this sort of hacky thing, where actually a lot of what it is and a lot of the way people approach it and do it is, here's someone over here who's going to just sort of tweak a few things, and we'll still carry on with all this stuff in our roadmap that we think is more important or is bigger. So, you know, you might be doing a massive redesign project of the checkout or whatever. And a lot of the time that's come from just some annual strategy thing. And the CRO person over here is still playing with button colors and stuff like that. So hopefully that just sort of is a bit of a history, and I'll just go into why I think those two things are different. But that just presents why I think CRO has got a particular approach to it. So what I'm really talking about when I say CRO and experimentation is where you've got CRO, and this is again not always the case, but mostly you've got a roadmap of stuff being delivered by a dev team or an external agency or whoever, and the majority of the stuff that they're working on comes from people's opinions. An annual strategy deck where somebody's gone, let's invest in changing the website next year or whatever. Best practices, UX experts, that sort of stuff. That's where most of that stuff comes from. And the CRO element is small. It's somebody doing small things and trying to input into that. What I mean by experimentation, conversely, regardless of what you call it, is research, data, and experimentation is the sole thing that gets anything into the dev queue. And the likes of Booking.com, Amazon, Google, these people who everybody sort of has heard of as being experimental companies, that is ultimately what they do. They have processes in place and ways of working and a culture that means that nothing gets done if it hasn't come from some sort of form of experimentation and testing. And so ultimately there are sort of 5 key differences. The first is that CRO typically is about small changes. That can really get exacerbated when you've got somebody using an A/B testing tool who actually can't code at all. And then really they can only change things in a WYSIWYG editor. Experimentation, on the other hand, is 100% of web development is based on experimentation. So even really big projects, whilst you might not be able to kind of A/B test something massive, it should have come from some canon of smaller bits of testing. 2, CRO tends to be kind of obsessed with finding winners. Now that comes from the fact that in the past, you've probably got a CRO consultant or a CRO person, and everybody's looking at them to try and find these winning things. And if they don't, it's not working right, so get rid of them. And that's why everybody's obsessed with winners. Conversely, experimentation is about learning. That is the fundamental point about experimentation. It's about learning. And a winning and a losing test are of equal value, because a losing test has so much value when you learn from why it lost and what to do. Some of the most successful things that you can ever do are as a result of a really spectacularly failed test and the learning that comes off the back of it. In fact, actually, the Amazon Echo, that came about as a result of the failed Amazon Fire phone. So you can read about that, like, all of the stuff that they developed for Amazon Fire and all of the learning of why that went wrong ended up becoming Amazon Echo and Alexa. So number 3, improper statistics. A knock-on effect of trying to find winners is that what a lot of people don't understand is that an A/B test is a statistical thing, right? It's not a cut and dry thing. The result of a test is a very sort of obscure statistical measurement. And if you want to say something's won, you can find a way to saying it's won. So a lot of the time the statistics are done deliberately improperly, but a lot of the time also just because people don't understand that. Experimentation takes the scientific method, does that really properly, proper planning, proper evaluation, all that sort of stuff. 4, there's very little organization. You've got a CRO person, and this is worst case scenario. I know a lot of CRO people don't work like this, but worst case scenario, they're just running a few tests every month whilst doing other stuff. Experimentation has a really rigorous process around it. It's scaled, it's got all sorts of people involved in it, and it's got a really kind of neat way of working. And then finally, CRO, not just because of the name, but it tends to focus on the conversion rate. Now, conversion rate is actually a bad proxy to revenue, which is in turn a bad proxy to profit. So experimentation should be about improving profit, and that could be in any area. It could be about improving customer experience. It could be about improving customer service, all sorts of things. So that's what I mean by the difference. And the
Jonny,
next thing, yes, of course.
Could you just go back that slide and elaborate slightly on your point there about conversion rate optimization is a bad proxy for X, Y, and Z? Just explain that to everyone. Yeah,
so I mean, a really good example is if you're optimizing the conversion rate, if you really want to improve your conversion rate, you can just do things like take out a load of traffic that doesn't occur. So like, maybe you've got a blog on the site, so just take it out of your Google Analytics. That will improve your conversion rate, right? So because conversion rate is a proxy, and really what it's supposed to be is a leading indicator to revenue. Now, revenue is also a bad proxy to profit, because you might have more profitable products and less profitable products. So if you if you focus on the conversion rate, you can also ignore things that are outside of that. Like a good example would be automotive. So years ago, I used to work with Mazda, and Mazda were obsessed with lead generation. So we were always kind of being pushed to get more test drive requests and brochure downloads and things like that. Problem with that is that it can take you 6 months to a year to decide to buy a car. So there's a whole phase where you're not ready to do that. And you want to go and look at the car and learn about it, and you're just, choosing. But by focusing on just that conversion point, you ignore everything else, and you optimizing for a particular point in time, which maybe people aren't ready for. So I always used to say, like, the sort of ridiculous example of that would be you just plaster all this like book a test drive stuff all over the site, and that's all the site is, and there's no cars or anything, and that's kind of the logic, the ridiculous logical progression. But that's the point. You've got to think about the total strategy of the business, what profit means, and what are the different things that you can optimize towards that.
We've had a question in there. You can choose, and maybe you're coming on to it in a minute. You want to talk about
it. Go for it.
Just around the culture of failure is good. You talked in experimentation about how equal weighting to success and failure. And someone's asked, how do you engender that culture where people find it okay to fail and celebrate it?
Yeah, that's a difficult thing, and it can be difficult if there is a legacy of the opposite of that. You do find organisations that what I call a culture of fake success, and it is a hard thing to change because it happens a lot. There are whole companies where nothing ever fails, nothing is ever unsuccessful because everything can always be spun into something successful. And that's a really kind of dangerous political place to be. People like Kodak and these other kind of spectacular failures, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like that. But I think, the way to do that is to just gradually chip away with trying to build a capability and a culture for experimentation. Because once people start to see the results of experiments, the failures and the learnings that happen from it, then that gradually chips away at that culture. But it can be hard. So there's just a kind of an economic side of it, and the benefit of it really. Now, one of the things that I talk about a lot, and if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see me say this a lot. This comes from a stat that the A/B testing platform Optimizely released. Now, they gave all of their data for all of the tests ever run on that platform to a guy at Harvard Business School, and he analyzed them, and he found that only 1 in 10 experiments ever run across the Optimizely platform produced a winning result. And that is a really important stat, because if the other way to look at that is if you're not testing, so all of those things, those were things that people thought were a good idea, that seemed like a good thing to do, seemed like a no-brainer probably a lot of the time. And only 1 in 10 of them worked. So you flip that around, you think, well, if you're not testing, then 9 out of 10 things that you do to your website of any kind is a waste of time, waste of money, and is damaging or could be damaging your revenue. And that is massive. And I honestly sometimes see it as my mission to try and open people's eyes about this, because at the end of the day, it's really hard to find things that work on websites. And the reason for that is because our opinions are rubbish. It's impossible to step outside of yourself and your career as a marketer and really see what customers see. And that's why it's so hard to do. But really, when you look at like how that works financially, this is a kind of a hypothetical situation where maybe you're doing 8 big things to your website over the course of a year or a quarter or whatever. Now, some of those things will work. They'll make you money. Some of those things won't. And the reality is that you don't know which ones won't. Now, this is over-exaggerated because quite a lot of them work. But if you take that 1 in 10 rule, only 1 of them would work. But those things cost you money to develop in production. And that's the cost there. These costs are all made up, by the way, that don't really mean anything. But the reality is that these things are cancelling each other out. So you're paying to develop them, but you're only getting benefit from the ones that win, and the other ones are cancelling those things out. So your return on investment, which you see at the right-hand side here, is seriously damaged. Now, if all you did through experimentation was to not do the things that don't work, then A, you have saved the money that you would have damaged by doing things that don't work. But B, you've not spent money on developing them. So, in theory, you could, reduce your retainer with your agency or whatever, you're just in this concept. And even though you might be spending on the concept of experimentation and developing, then you're still getting more ROI because you're reducing the amount of things that don't work. And the other point about this is that experimentation is a much more efficient way of developing, because you can develop things really quickly and easily in experimentation and then throw them away. Whereas in production web development, you tend to go through much more onerous processes. And an exaggerated way to talk about this is if I ran tests on a website for a year and not a single one of them worked, then that would still be successful because A, you haven't spent a penny on production web development, and B, you haven't done anything that wouldn't work or wouldn't have worked otherwise. But really, that's not what it's about. The real point of it is that you're fueling your web development operations with stuff that you know works and prioritizing it according to the risk-reward benefit. So how do you actually do it? This is really what my business is about. This is what my sort of life's mission is about, really, is try and help people do this and replicate what we did at Sky so effectively. And it's not that hard. It's just that you need to know how. Now, the first part is, and this goes back to what we were talking about in terms of profitability and revenue and things, is really sort of strategically understanding what performance looks like for your business, how to measure it, and what you are sort of concretely optimizing against to do that. Now, this is actually a client of ours that are an e-commerce retailer, and they sell their own products, their own manufactured products, which predominantly get sold through Amazon, Argos, and other kind of companies like that. And so really their whole sort of digital strategy is about creating a direct website that will bring people to them to purchase direct, which saves the cost per acquisition and the commission of them going through third-party resellers. And so there's a whole piece of work before this, which is mapping out what profitability looks like for them. And then this is really kind of like a customer journey funnel, as it were. But the point is, very clearly, we're kind of from that mapping, understanding exactly what's happening. Sorry, I'm talking about the wrong thing here. Let me just talk about this again. This is actually a customer service framework that actually is based on something that I did at Sky. So as I mentioned, CRO does not need to be necessarily about conversion or about anything commercial. It can be about customer experience, and this comes from Sky's customer service, or is developed from it. And what we were doing here is trying to understand what's the benefit of customer service. What percentage, how do we get people to seriously solve problems online without needing to call up, essentially, which is the marker of whether it works or not. And so what we're doing here is going, if people choose digital, then we can measure the percentage of interactions which is digital. If they engage with us, then we can make sure they understand the different things that they can do. They need to be able to find and answer what it is that they're looking for. That should resolve their problem completely. Now, this is about basically identifying the metrics that allows you to understand whether or not that experience is working and what you need to optimize. So, for example, if we're trying to improve the percentage of people's service interactions which are digital, we might optimize marketing to let them know. We might optimize policy, which says what the call centers can and can't do. The point of that is it's a strategic framework that is organizing what it is that you are optimizing. The second part is like what are the building blocks of experimentation internally? Now, a lot of people will talk about a culture of experimentation and talk about things like mindset and senior buy-in, but really that's the icing on the cake. If you don't have the rest of the capability, it is very hard to actually get anybody to buy into it. So there are some really kind of key things. The first is, do you have the right tools and technology? That's technology for experimentation, but also for insight and analytics and process and things like that. Do you have the right skills, competence, so the right people internally, externally, and do they have the right skills? Execution is a really key part. So one of the biggest sort of pieces of transformation that we went through at Sky when we did this was to integrate how experimentation worked with agile. And I won't go into that in a lot of detail, but needless to say, that's a really important thing to think about, how you go from experimentation to production web development. And then process, I'll come on to in a minute, but process is really kind of the glue and the beating heart of it all. Because if you're going to scale it, you're going to end up with a lot of people involved in it and a lot of people sort of having the ability to produce ideas, come up with ideas. And ultimately, if they can't if they can't kind of work together in a seamless fashion, which means process and workflow, then it doesn't work. And finally, yes, you need kind of mindset. So having those things in place and sort of thinking about them is really key. Now, it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. You can't really start to build a capability unless you have sort of buy-in and resource and funding. You can't get that unless you have a capability. So it's about, it's a kind of a virtuous upward cycle where you have to start off with what you can, get a winning test, socialize it, try and get people to buy into it, so on and so forth.
And just going back to that slide, I think for people watching, if you could just go back one slide, I think for people watching, what I'm taking from this is the triangle on the right is actually a really good framework to assess your own organization if you're thinking about trying to drive a culture of experimentation and implement it, or whether you believe you have it and you want to assess how well you're doing. You can actually use the topics here around mindset, process, people and skills, fast dev and tech stack as a way of scoring yourself and saying, well, look, if our current state is out of 10 is 4, and you can entirely decide how you score it yourselves, but next state might be 6, future state you want to get to is 8. Then what you've provided people here with is a way to assess their own organizations and think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is ultimately a kind of a consulting framework that we use when we're helping clients like this. These are the sort of things or business questions that we're answering for them. And it's not the same for every client. It's completely different. It can be, like how you're set up and how you need to be set up can be different. But yeah, you're right. It totally acts like a maturity framework.
We've got a few questions I wanted to feed in, and the first one I'm going to invoke my privilege, but it's more just some thoughts. But in the past, I love the book Lean Startup by Eric Ries. I think a lot of people have loved it. I've been using it for a very long time, the principles, and I've actually developed some of my own tools and frameworks out of it in different templates. The one I really like, which I think on your previous slide you represented in a slightly different way, is the opposite to the build, measure, learn loop, which is you start with what you want to learn. You then say, well, what are the measurements I need to gather to create that learning? And then what am I going to build or do to go and do it? I think that's a really interesting one. And yeah, I think at Lloyd's, I used to work for Lloyd's Banking Group, and one of the projects they ran there where they didn't experiment was they spent a large amount of money on a particular new feature, which they went and built in code into the back-end platform, which is incredibly expensive to do in banking. And they could have actually gone and learnt the same thing by selecting 10 customers and calling them. But instead, they spent a lot of money, millions of pounds, on building the functionality, only to learn that it wasn't quite right. It wasn't what customers needed.
Yeah,
you must have seen that in places.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason this exists really at a high level is for exactly that reason, but also because what you tend to find is that companies, when they're sort of, building digital stuff or trying to develop digital stuff, it's easy to start out with what can be measured. So it's really easy to start out with the data. So, you'll tend to find people go, well, we'll measure conversion and we'll measure traffic and whatever, and then what happens is, they're optimizing things that really don't speak to their business strategy at all. Yeah. And exactly to your point, the same thing happens with startups and things like that, where they kind of go ahead and build things without thinking, how does this actually translate into, or how does this support our business strategy? And if you start out the other way, if you start from the top down and you start out with literally like a really kind of high level view of what profit should mean, and then how, what do you need to do, what are the levers that you can pull from a cost and a revenue point of view in order to support that strategy, then what are the things that you need to measure at a totally conceptual level, or even to build and do at a conceptual level. And then once you get underneath that and you actually start concretely doing things, then it all kind of ladders up to that. And as a kind of really concrete example to that, I'm working with a company at the moment that I'm building something like this for. They've got a loyalty program. And they'd started out, the point of the loyalty program is to make people stay with them. on a subscription model, basically. And they have been for years measuring it by just sort of the amount of people who sign up to this thing. That's the kind of KPI, is like, it gets more people to sign up. So what happens is they end up like running all these competitions and things just to drive sign-ups. But then when you stand back and you look at it, you go, what is the point in that? Because if the point of this thing, this loyalty thing, is that someone's supposed to go, yes, I'll renew my contract, then they have to believe it's brilliant, and that it has to give them something they can't get from anywhere else. And just the fact that they entered the competition 12 months ago, it has nothing to do with that. And that is so easy to lose sight of things like that, because you haven't started out thinking, what is the point of this thing? How do we measure it? How do we improve it? So that's what that is ultimately about.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember as well, isn't it, that the answer to what do we go and do to learn isn't always to go and write code. It can be a phone call, it can be a questionnaire, it can be observation, it can be any number of different tools, and the leaner, the cheaper, the better, because that will get your answer. And code, really, everyone wants to rush to go and build the thing they're imagining in their head, but actually there are some really valuable lessons you can learn along the way.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm just going to feed in a question here from Sam. What makes you say someone who's doing a minor front-end change is using improper statistics? I think this relates to a few slides back. Surely you have big experiments and small experiments dependent on the research.
Yeah, so again, like, you know, when I was talking about the semantics, that what I'm presenting here is a sort of a broad brush of like, what does the worst case scenario of CRO look like, and what does the best case scenario of experimentation look like? Absolutely, there are people doing CRO, doing small front-end changes, who know everything about experimentation and are very, very well versed in statistics and things like that. I'm absolutely not saying that everybody doing CRO doesn't do it properly. The fact of the matter is, though, that you know, in all of my years and all of the clients that I've worked with, I've yet to really come across that many people who properly understand how to measure experimentation and the statistics. And the other problem is that when you have particularly kind of external consultants and people like that, back in the day when I started doing this, those kind of people were paid on a performance model. So you as a company would get a consultant, and you wouldn't pay them anything, but you would pay them a percentage of the revenue uplift that could be demonstrated by the tests that they did. Now, if you're a consultant doing that, you are going to make those tests look like they won, right? Because that's how you earn the money. Even subconsciously, you would do that. And that sort of thinking has pervaded a lot of how things work. A lot of people still do that a little bit deliberately. Mostly it's just done sort of subconsciously, because even within an organization, you've got a CRO person and everybody's looking at them to find winning tests and to have these big sort of cool winning things. So, 3 days after the test, it's showing 20% uplift. I haven't got the sample size, but so what? I'll go and say that it's won, because that makes me look good, So that's like what I'm really referring to, is how CRO is treated by companies and their perception of it, and what that makes people who actually practice it do, knowingly or unknowingly, really. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying everybody who does CRO is stupid at statistics by far, no way.
We'll let you crack on with your presentation as well now. So.
Great. So then this is just about process. So really, if you're going to scale experimentation, you can read things about culture of testing, and like a lot of that will probably mention Booking.com, and somewhere along the lines, someone will say that in Booking.com, everybody who works there can run a test. That's true. But if you were to just take that and then go, right, well, let's take that into our company and we'll just give everybody access to Optimizely or whatever, and everybody can run tests, it would be complete anarchy and carnage. And Booking.com don't work like that. They have very careful governance, sort of center of excellence type stuff, training, education, so that everybody understands it. The scaling of it has happened very carefully so that it works properly. Same with Google, Amazon, people like that. Now, process and and central management is a way to do that. This is a tool that I developed over the years, which I call the operating system for experimentation. And I'm not going to go into it or demo it, but suffice to say, basically, it's like a project management tool that systematizes the whole process of experimentation, from identifying pieces of research and analytics to prioritizing those pieces of work, to prioritizing the ideation that comes out of it, and project management and prioritizing the experimentation off the back of it. And the point is that if you have a lot of people involved, you've got developers, you might have different research people, you might have different people effectively running experiments through a project management tool. It will only really work if everything's sort of really well-oiled and is being prioritized. You're not getting clashing experiments on different pages. Everything's being measured in the right way. There's certain people whose skill sets are to make sure that works, and they can easily oversee and feed into all the stuff that's happening. So that sort of process and project management workflow type of thing is really, really key. And the final part is just a sort of an interesting thing, which I mentioned briefly, which is about the sort of execution side of it. Now, this is a bit of a story about Sky, actually. Really, like when we first started doing a lot of testing at Sky, we found that as we were kind of finding things that we then wanted to push into production, those things, everybody would go great, and then we'd put them in a roadmap in the different squads, and invariably, like, they would be very slow to get done, and we couldn't figure out why. And when we looked into it, it was really because there was one roadmap in each squad. And what happens when you've got a roadmap, typically in web development, not all the time, but that will have big things in it and medium things and small things, and they tend to get organized by what's big down to what's small, because the big things sort of churn around the top. They're the most interesting things for people to work on, so on and so forth. And then you've got small bugs and critical things that sort of just go in at the bottom and come straight out because they need sorting out. And then the stuff in the middle sort of sits there and doesn't necessarily get done. And that's what was happening. And so what we did was to split up the roadmaps into three. Where we've got, what happens here is what I've just talked about. You've got data and insight feeding into a prioritization system. There's a triage process where you go, right, we want to test this now. Actually, there's no point testing it. It's just a content change. Arguably, this should never be a no-brainer at all, but hey-ho. And then, there's a simple thing. Somebody can develop that in a testing platform without a developer. There's complex stuff that needs developer support to actually build the test itself. So there's one little roadmap. Now, when stuff comes out of that process, it's either a kind of a fairly meaty project that needs to go into a main dev queue, or it's a fairly simple change or a bug fix or something like that that goes in, that should be dealt with separately. So by splitting up the roadmaps into three, we were able to make sure the product owners were concurrently running those things without necessarily kind of parking any one of them. Again, that's the way that works will be different in every company, but the point of it is you have to think about how you go from here's experimentation, here's production, web development, and how do those things interface and work together.
And Jonny, I can certainly vouch for that last slide, because my last role, Find My Past, I was CPO there, and we implemented exactly that. So we had to handle maybe you could just bring it up and I just reference parts. No, thanks. So the no-brainers, as you call them, we call that the prod ops team. So a bit like DevOps, but the prod ops team, production operations. So, or product operations, sorry. So the idea there was where DevOps is to continuously improve the development process by removing blockers. It's a mindset and culture. The idea was to continuously improve the product, so product operations. And we used to rotate the engineers into that group. So they'd be moving from big meaty projects where you've got roadmap, you've got experimentation, you've got user research. That's where you're doing the big features, and where you're investing millions of pounds of time. After a while, that can become tiring for different reasons for different people. So we'd cycle people through, and everyone would do a series of sprints in the products team. And then you had the middle team, where we were doing things like we had a landing page which designed to convert to family tree creation, because it was an ancestral site competing with Ancestry.com. And we had a real problem with the fact that we had a huge number of signups, but no one creating a tree with one node on it, which was their own name. And we wanted to get to 7 because 7 was the magic number for us, a bit like it is on Facebook. If you added 7 family members, you tended to go on and become a subscriber. And so there was a team, a group of engineers, a designer, a product manager, an analyst, and their job was to build an experiment and launch tests to try and solve that problem. And then you had customer research flagging that, there was a JavaScript error on a particular page and the Pay Now button wasn't working. So they'd go in and fix that. It's a no-brainer. And it works really well, this approach. And I think that the added insight sharing with everyone is to keep engineers and team members more generally rotating through so they build different skill sets.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that is what kind of happened really, and what we advise everybody in this situation, because ultimately, developers would rather work on sort of bigger, interesting projects, and so even if it's just subconsciously, that is why some of these sort of more medium-sized things get kind of left, because people just naturally shy away from them because they want, they'd rather work on more interesting things. So exactly by sort of rotating people and making sure that you haven't got one person just stuck doing what they perceive as sort of fairly unfulfilling work, then you can kind of speed things up. But all that is I think just going back to the idea of CRO versus experimentation, in a lot of companies, not all of them, but a lot of companies where you've got CRO people, they're just sort of throwing things over the wall. They go, this has worked, and they just kind of pass it over into dev, and then will be sort of fairly disheartened when it never gets done. And that is because nobody's really thought about that process and how those things should work together. Yeah.
We've got lots of questions coming in, so please keep adding them, everybody. I'm going to try and take them in order. First question here then, what data/tools would Jonny recommend teams utilising to inform their experimentation and decision making? Is it predominantly analytics or voice of customer?
You have to use everything. So I have a slide that I haven't included here, but kind of have this sort of 2x2 grid thing where you've got, in one, there's sort of like broad brush things like digital analytics that are going to tell you what's happening, what people are doing, what kind of behavior is. Then you've got sort of quantitative customer feedback and insight, things like survey tools, stuff like that. And then you've got more qualitative individual things. So iQuant would be a good example, sort of user testing, that sort of stuff, where you're really kind of honing in on the qualitative aspects of the experience. And then the other thing would be stuff like session recording and heat mapping and stuff like that. And you have to take into account all of those things, because some stuff will tell you, digital analytics is going to give you really good detail on what's happening, but not why. This is things people talk about all the time. Similarly, user testing and stuff like that is giving you really deep qualitative information, but you don't know whether or not you can quantify whether those things are being experienced by large numbers of customers. So you have to use it all. What I would say is that there's definitely certain things that are more likely to produce a decent effect than others. Like competitive analysis, for example, is quite a structured thing to do, but it's ultimately your opinion. You're just looking at somebody else's website and going, well, I don't like that and I don't like that. It's a very sort of opinionated thing. It doesn't mean don't do it, but what we try and do is always sort of layer these things together. So that project management tool that I showed you, what's built into that actually is that multiple different pieces of research can feed into the same ideas, and that will sort of build up the prioritization of it. Because if we've found something from a piece of competitive research, then that will be down weighted because it's just competitive research. But if we find the same thing from user testing, then that weights it. So you have to use it all basically.
And just to help Vilius, that you asked the question, but then to name some tools, at Find My Pass we use Optimizely for A/B testing, and that we found that to be very productive, because actually you could cheat a bit and leave tests running at 100% traffic as a way of, until you could get to actually develop them and make the changes to code base. We use Power BI for our analytics. We use Session Cam and Lucky Orange to record sessions and be able to look at an individual users and replay and watch them. We use Hotjar for heat mapping. and we use, I think it was probably most of it. Oh yeah, we used Launch Darkly as well, which is at the time was a newer platform starting to A/B test. So there are lots and lots of tools out there. And just on, I mean, I can't resist the plug for iQuant. So thank you for naming us, Jonny. But you know what we help with is right at the early stages when you're still designing. You haven't launched anything to users. We can provide you with insights to where people will look on a page. Will a call to action attract their attention or not? Has the entire journey got the optimum flow through it? All before you've even gone live. So you can experiment in our platform and fail fast, really just using design files, no code. So you know, it's, as Jonny said, we also used to use at Find My Past user interviews and usertesting.com for doing task completion tests. So it's the whole, I think, Jonny, to your point, is the whole range of things applied with common sense at the right point, the right tool for the right job.
Yeah, and just to add quickly,
yeah.
like if even for big companies, I would always advise start out with free or very, very cheap and see how far you get with them, because you know eventually you'll outgrow them, but when you do, you will know exactly what it is you've outgrown, and then you can go and source something that does that thing. Worst case scenario is to just start out just buying a whole load of enterprise level stuff that you'll potentially never use, and the free tools are good as well.
So still lots of questions coming in. Quick one for you. We've got a few minutes left, so if you can sort of do the abridged version of your answers.
Yeah.
How do you balance the relationship between data-led experimentation to creativity?
So I've written quite a bit about this in the past, actually. Ultimately, I think those things kind of are and have to be harmonious. You know, data can only tell you so much, and then creativity has to take over from it. In a perfect world, data sort of shapes what to be creative about, and then that's kind of a large set of parameters within which to be creative. But if there's no data involved at all, creativity, remember, is just opinion, and that's where you get the danger. So absolutely, those two things should work in harmony, and can do.
Great, thank you. Next question. How do you scale experimentation from running a few isolated experiments a month by a dedicated personal team to having experimentation at the center of everything the company does? And to build on that, how do you effectively integrate experimentation with personalization at scale? And again, just the sort of the shortened version, you can always make contact with Jonny after this if you want.
Yeah, so what I've always sort of talked about is that as a spark that lights the fire. And for me, that is a really, really sort of interesting, if possible, controversial test that you can go and socialize around the business. Because if you can start to share, we did this, it had this, and it's quite a divisive thing, or it's quite a surprising result, and you can show the revenue off the back of it, that's what really gets things going. Outside of that, it's that sort of pyramid thing I showed you. You've got to start building up those different kind of bits of capability.
Perhaps pop back to that for people just to remind them on your slides.
Yeah, so these are the building blocks. You know, these are the things that you have to start thinking about. And each of these are 5 separate business questions that you've got to think about. How do we put this stuff into our organization? But you won't get there if you don't get the support and the buy-in to actually even bother thinking about it. And that comes from, like I say, what I've sometimes call it a propaganda experiment. You know, even if you have to be a bit fast and loose with the stats to get it, you know, you need a really interesting sort of PR socializing experiment that you can go around and show people and get them wound up about it.
To create that wow factor and get that buy-in, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for those of you watching, you'll be able to watch a recording of this to see those slides again. So next question, Max has asked this. What do you think is the best way to track and report on experiment performance end to end? And then I'll just read this, have end-to-end research. So he's saying they have end-to-end data that we stitch together for each experiment and variation, but difficulty in finding a tool or a way to put it all together into a dashboard with statistically significant calculations. So what's the best way to track and report on experiment performance end to end?
Yeah, well, so briefly, like that project management tool that I showed you does that for us and our clients. It's where we kind of track all of the results. We use a third-party statistical engine to measure our results, and then we pull that data into there. But just standing back from the stats and stuff, at a high level, what you really need to be doing is looking at the likely revenue impact of each test annualized, and very importantly, not just the ones that win. So if you calculate the like conservatively the revenue impact of that, what that thing is going to do, but also here's something that didn't win, this is what we're saving by not doing it, and balance those things together, you can start to sort of get people to understand the difference. The other thing is, like I've said a few times, the whole point is about learning. So you need to try and build in metrics that say, to what extent have you learned from this, and how, and has something come off the back of it. We have quite a good way of doing that, which I won't go into now, but that's, for me, the most important thing. Is the whole thing is about a canon of learning.
Yeah. And Max, just to reassure you, it's a really difficult thing to do. When Jonny showed me that tool for the first time that he's built, I got quite overexcited about it because I've never seen it done that way before. So we struggled through with Excel spreadsheets and Google Sheets and tried to bring all the data into there. But it's a tough problem, and it's not easily solved. And it does go back to having more than just one person on it. It needs to be an acceptance and adoption by the leadership team to give people the space to go and build these tools and really think about the problem. Next question for you. Is there any tool or functionality that would be a must-have that currently experimentation tools do not provide? And the follow-on question is, what could a developer provide to the experimentation community that's currently missing? Reed, what business should they launch? Anything that's missing, must-have, that current experimentation tools do not provide?
Yeah. I think most of them don't provide that sort of really good kind of workflow process, project management stuff. Optimizely does have something like that, but Optimizely is incredibly expensive. There are a couple of other things out there like that. So that's really I'd say the bits that's missing. The tools, like A/B testing tools themselves, like when you really get into it, like you end up seeing it as just a way to serve A and B. And they tend to have a lot of functionality in there about reporting and things that you end up not really needing. So one of the things I've always thought of is like, how can you really, really simplify that and make like a really low cost version of that for people who understand that and are just getting developers to build and release stuff, and strip away the extraneous stuff that you don't need to charge people for. You can probably, you could probably get a lot of traction out of something like that.
So it's the end-to-end project management kind of administrative layer to it that's missing in answer to your question. Next question. Do you still think conversion rate is a bad metric even for landing pages? Would the primary metric, in your opinion, be just making it to the next step in the funnel?
No. So just to clarify, I don't think conversion rate is a bad metric at all. It's it's something important to optimize for. My point there was about not seeing beyond that, and not seeing that that a website is there to deliver commercial value for a business, and what does that commercial value look like? You won't get a board like looking at the conversion rate. They're looking at the revenue, right? So that's that point. The problem with measuring just getting to the next step is that doesn't mean that it's having any particular impact downstream. When you should use that, though, is when you've got very small volumes, because if you're trying to do testing on websites with really small volumes, you could be running tests for absolutely ages when you don't have very many conversions. So a good way to get around that is to just measure the thing that has the highest sort of percentage conversion rate, which can be like a click-through or something like that. So all of these things kind of have their place in a way, but certainly if you can, you should be measuring final conversion, and better still, revenue or profit, if that's possible.
Great. That's all we've got time for. We had one outstanding question from Ronnie, and Ronnie, we're taking a note of it, and Jonny will pass it on to you. And I believe, Ronnie, we have your contact details, which you kindly supplied. So we will, Jonny, if you could answer that question directly, we'll pass it on to you. So yeah. I hope that's okay, Ronnie. I'm sorry we didn't get to it, but we want to finish on time. But we've answered, on the basis that we cover that one, we've answered every question that was put to you. So thank you very much, Jonny. A couple of points, really. Just so everyone's aware, the next webinar is the 17th of June with Jeff Deutsch, Marketing Director for Longtail UX. and he's going to explain how to build SEO-friendly landing pages that actually convert. So very, very useful and interesting topic. Keep an eye out follow iQuant on LinkedIn, and you'll get first notification of those and be able to grab a slot. But from everybody at iQuant, and I think everybody on the call as well, Jonny, thank you so much. That was a really, really fascinating webinar, and there's lots of really lovely comments coming in from people thanking you. So we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us, and we hope you'll come back again soon and maybe do a follow-up at a point in the future.
I'd love to, yeah. Thank you very much.
Great. Well, lovely to have you, and everybody else. Stay safe and stay well, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars with iQuant, and have a good rest of your day. Bye.